Hello, everyone. Thank you for spending a bit of time with us today. My name is Jared Gingras. I'm the managing director and one of the analysts at the firm Real Story Group. And at Real Story Group, what we try to do with our clients on an everyday basis is help them make the right technology decision for what they're trying to do. Now, I'll be quite honest, in some cases, that's easier than others, right? We have people come to us all the time and say, Real Story Group, can you help us pick the right digital asset management system for what we're trying to do? And I can say, sure, the digital asset management marketplace is a defined marketplace. I just have to find out which scenario you're trying to achieve within that marketplace. Likewise, if you came to us and said, help us pick a web content management system, it's a defined marketplace. But when someone comes to us about creative operations technology, then it gets a little bit murky, because there's no defined single technology that solves your creative operations needs, right? And that's why I'm really excited about this session today, where we'll be talking about what should be in your technical toolkit. And I can tell you right away, the answer is going to be different for each and every one of you. There is no single solution, but we have some real industry veterans on our panel today, Robert and Teresa, who are going to provide some different perspectives. You know, Robert comes from the vendor side, Teresa comes from the consulting and analyst and overall strategist side. So I think we're going to get some real different points of view as to, you know, what they see as the most important pieces of this toolkit. And hopefully they'll share some other best practices as how you can be really successful as you build your toolkit. So without further ado, let's do some introductions. Robert, I mentioned that you come from the sales, from the vendor side of the house here. Could you give everyone a little sense of where you come from and your background and you know your point of view that you bring to this conversation?
Yeah, so I've built an entire career on trying to reduce the gap between the creative idea and the actual delivery of that creative idea. And traditionally, in my career, that's been about technology. That's finding a way to, you know, if it's in an old-fashioned newspaper, it's getting between the writer's words and the printed edition. But of course, nowadays it can be in any media and any kind of creative person. So that's always been my aim. Of course, I now run a business that actually needs and uses people as part of that process to help creative people perform at their very best. So that's my background there, Jared.
Thank you, Robert. And Teresa, you come from not the vendor side. You know, you have a background in a variety of technologies. So give us a little sense of where you're coming from here.
I'm most famous for working with Jared Gingras for 20 some years. That's what it so
I wouldn't lead with that on your resume.
Yeah, no, I guess I wouldn't. Yeah, so I come from largely a consulting background originally. Worked in actually venture capital that invested in you know, a lot of early product development of online streaming services, and then I went and worked for a system integrator where I ran a content management team with Jared over many years, and then I was an analyst for 10 years, and now I'm just an independent renegade consultant, mostly working on digital asset management strategy and implementation, and occasionally people ask me about creative operations and what DAM can do in the creative operations world. So I liked your introduction because it's very muddy in terms of what technologies can get applied and do get applied. So I get involved in a lot of those conversations to varying degrees.
Right, and so let's pick it up there and use that as a jumping point. You know, this murkiness and muddiness of this marketplace, it's very confusing for a lot of people. And I think, like I indicated, you know, the technology vendors who are trying to sell into this space don't really help, because they're all trying to solve a specific problem, but creative operations is this big problem that people are trying to get their hands around, and so as such, every organization, every industry has different challenges that get brought to the table. So I want to kind of pose the question to you. You know, even when we use the word operations within an organization, that's a loaded term. That means a lot of different things, and you know, there's even other labels that get thrown around here. You know, this marketing resource management, when we think about tracking, you know, how much time and costs get allocated to this process. There's campaign coordination, campaign publishing and orchestration. There's content operations, and then there's creative operations. So from where you sit, you know, how do you draw the lines around what is creative operations and what isn't creative operations? Teresa, do you want to take a stab at that, or Robert, just jump off here?
Go ahead, Teresa.
Yeah, I'm happy to go first. I think You know, it depends. I hate answering that, but it really does depend on kind of the type of organization. I think an agency, for example, you know, or even an in-house agency would answer that question very differently than, you know, a major retailer would or a big brand would. And I know that one of the, you know, if I can answer from a technical standpoint, I'm going to try to keep it on the technology since this is a technology session. You know, I find that increasingly what I've seen is, you know, organizations wanting to procure multiple solutions at once because they're trying to cover the whole creative ecosystem. And some vendors can sort of maybe kind of do that. But I know that I've had two sort of strategies in the last year that were DAM and MRM at the same time. So it's the idea of we need to manage our marketing operations. That needs to include campaigns, that needs to include digital assets, and we kind of can't separate those two things in our operational sense. But I think it's different. You know, Robert knows the production side better than I do. I think from a distribution side, it's like once those assets get created and once the advertising exists, then yeah, you kind of need to do DAM and MRM and some of these things together. Whereas I think maybe you answer the question a little bit differently, you know, earlier in the ecosystem. I think that's probably where Robert can come in and talk a little bit more about that.
Well, I think just to tackle that question about what is creative operations, it is the bit that, in certainly my experience with our in-house agency clients and creative agency clients, that lies between the marketer's need and the execution of a campaign around that need to meet the goals of the marketer. So it's kind of encompasses pretty much anything in there in our experience. And for us, it means that we're now moving towards technology, that we actually work with so many in-house agencies and creative agencies that we are seeing so many applications of technology and so many massive gaps in that application of technology as well. And if you talk about DAM systems, I think the figure is that something like 50%, is it? You probably know, Teresa, 50% of creative operations in brands and in-house agencies don't even have a DAM system.
That's right.
You know, so many of them are having to rely on whatever IT gave them. And to my mind, if IT gives you a system and it uses a floppy disk icon to save something, you already know you're on the wrong system and you're not using something that's fit for purpose.
Floppy disk. Wow.
You see it as an icon.
To get mentioned on this panel.
You see icons, and you see old-fashioned printer icons. It still amazes me to this day that, you know, it's just like a red flag. You don't want to go anywhere near that system.
Yeah, I have, you know, in terms of this also this idea of creative operations, I think there's a collaboration element to it that that I think increasingly the technical toolkit is supposed to satisfy. And I currently have one project that is it's a large global sort of luxury brand, and they have 5 agencies that are actually working together to procure a system so that they can all collaborate on that brand's material. And it's interesting because there's this dynamic of like the agencies are kind of competitive in some ways, and they don't necessarily want one agency to see something that's a work in progress, and then they have these little conflicts. And so sometimes the creative operations, even though you want it to happen in a single technology because you're the brand or you're the client and you got 5 agencies working on different stuff, sometimes that technical solution, you have to kind of parse it and make the roles and groups work properly so that different groups see and do different things. And I think that's part of the challenge of needing creative operations. If you're a big brand and you have lots of agencies and maybe an in-house agency like working on all these different things as well.
I mean, I can definitely speak to that because that's a lot of what we do. We're working with clients who have Workfront rolled out, and we have to be part of that Workfront system. The challenge for us is that as a production unit, what we need to do is we need to track our own metrics, and we need to track them very closely. So although the client will have Workfront, they will assign work to us, it really behoves us to make sure that we actually have a technical connection to the Workfront system so that we can seamlessly pass that to the right people internally. We can take advantage and leverage the technology we have internally to help manage the process of production, but also measure what we're doing prior to then sending it back through whatever proofing mechanism they've got, if they've got one indeed, or maybe using our proofing mechanism, and then once it's been approved, send it back through their system. So there are all those kind of distinctions to worry about too.
Yeah. So I think you already started to touch on a whole slew of different things that I'd like to follow up on. And Robert, you even said it could be anything, right? In your creative operation system, it's such an open green field in so many cases. And as such, I'm sure you're seeing this, and I'm seeing this. There's so much experimentation happening, right? And even within the single organization, there's one group's trying one thing, another group's trying another thing.
Tools are so accessible, right? These software as a service
exactly
tools are so accessible. Like Rike, and you'll find that there's someone somewhere who's got a couple of logins to Rike, and they're running little Maverick projects here, and someone else is using Monday, and then you've got the corporate system, then you've got something else someone's trying. So the cost of entry to these is so easy that it's it's very common to see this kind of getting out of control internally.
I agree, and one of the things that one of the kind of ways to mitigate that, because that's good, lowering that barrier to entry, I think is good, but it introduces a whole slew of other problems, right? When people are just going rogue and doing their own thing. But I think when we advise our clients to try to make some sense about this, I never want to stifle that sort of experimentation. And sometimes I like to use the analogy of the shopping mall. It's a bit dated. It's not quite as dated as the floppy disk analogy, but the notion of a shopping mall where you have anchor stores that are semi-permanent, hopefully are not being swapped out on a regular basis, and then you have your specialty shops and your kiosks that do get interchanged quite a bit, right? I think when you think about what should be in your toolkit, I think it helps to think about, okay, we're going to allow some experimentation, but let's identify what are our core anchor stores. And sometimes it's, Teresa, you mentioned DAM as an anchor store. Robert, you mentioned Workfront, which is fundamentally a workflow tool to help shepherd, creative materials through a workflow or process, right? And so that's two examples of what I think are possibly anchor stores for many of the folks on the call today. But what else are you seeing as anchor stores, or are those two of the big ones for you?
I think something that enables collaboration, because I was talking about this yesterday on Henry Stewart webinar about creative automation. There's only I think earlier in the ecosystem, it's much more difficult to sort of automate or really strictly have a workflow. And so you have to have some technology that enables collaboration. And of course, this has never been truer than now. We have to say, because of the pandemic, there's been changes. And especially I recall, the energy of creative teams being in a room and having a whole bunch of stuff hanging on a wall and talking about it, and the big printers, and the sort of things when people working on catalogs and magazines and stuff. And now there has to be a place, a virtual destination where you can go and just mark up and dialogue and have a conversation. And there's a huge market for those kinds of technologies. And to Robert's point, the cost of entry on some of these is nothing, or very low. And so that starts to cause problems because everybody's got their own idea, or every market has their own idea, or every agency that works with the company has its own idea. And it's very hard to get the governance around that.
Well, that's the bit where there isn't a low cost of entry, is the fact that these can all work in isolation, and that's fine. But to integrate them is where you start to rack up the big bucks. All these platforms have APIs. You can do it theoretically, but unfortunately, a lot of people come at them very organically, and having a bit here and a bit there. And then at the end, it's a question of how do we link these to work collaboratively, efficiently? And the answer is you can't, unless you're willing to splash out a lot of money, and you can't do it without any forethought and really thinking through in advance what it is you're trying to achieve as the end game. And these systems, the low cost of entry doesn't lend itself to that.
Yeah, and I think collaboration is such an interesting thing. Think about collaboration and workflow. It's about in many cases giving people a destination to go do work, right? Like you said, Teresa. Or when we talk about workflow, it's applying some rigidity to sometimes not a rigid process, right? And I think that's what's one of the biggest challenges about creative operations. If you're dealing with creative people who work in a certain way that might not be able to be grammatically defined, right? And so it's this constant blend between, in my world, it's like I see it as constant blend between flexibility and control, right? And you got to find that right balance, and finding that right balance is hard, right? And so I think that's one of the big barriers we have to get through.
Yeah, sort of
at least what I'm seeing.
rigor in some ways is contrary to the creative process, isn't it? And thinking about a couple days ago, I was on with some agency people, and there was this one guy who's, I mean, you think my top's colorful, like he was wearing orange and giant glasses, and like he looked like an incredible character, and you could tell that he spends his whole day just thinking about incredibly creative and off the wall things. The last thing he wants to do is follow a process. I mean, these are not people who want to be in a workflow tool. These are not, and if they were, they wouldn't be who they are, and they wouldn't be coming up with these sorts of ideas. And so, in so many ways, I think pigeonholing people like that it would be like saying to a musician, you have to play according to this meter and tone, and you're not allowed to divert from that, and to hell if it doesn't fit your song, and that's the problem. I think that's a fundamental challenge when it comes to creative operations technology, is you're trying to regiment people who are inherently not inclined to do it.
Well, there is a point at which you do want that control, though, isn't there? You want the creative sparks to fly at a certain point as things go into the hopper, but after that, you absolutely do not want the creative sparks to fly. You want perhaps aesthetic understanding. You need regulatory understanding. You need process and technical understanding. So there is this kind of soft bit at the beginning where you just don't want to affect what's going on in terms of the creative process, and then you want to kind of drive that into some kind of process. But it is true. We've seen this ourselves. In the past 20 years, the systems we give our clients or we use from our clients were previously very kind of rigid, very strict. This is the path you'll follow and that's it for everything. And as time's gone by, particularly the move to in-house agencies, which we're a big part of, everything is much more project orientated, and those projects take different shapes each time. And the systems that we provide or that we have to use allow for different routes. Here's a project, it's going to involve these stakeholders, it's going to involve these steps along the way, these things have to happen before these things can happen, these things can go on in parallel. And we now create systems that match that reality. It's unfortunate because it's much less efficient and more time consuming at the setup stage and requires more thought. But on the other hand, it hopefully does allow that creative freedom to last a bit longer in the process, which I think is needed, certainly in in-house agencies.
And at this point, I'm just going to pause and apply some technology to this conversation, because I just want to remind those who are attending this session that you can actually ask your own questions for Teresa and Robert via the Q&A app. Feel free to keep those questions coming in. I have a bunch of my own, but I want to hear from all of you and make sure we're addressing what you'd like to hear. We do have one question from Karen, who asks, is it okay to have a bunch of different systems, or should there be this overarching move to consolidate?
Go ahead, Robert. I'll let you take that.
Thank you, Teresa. I'm so glad you passed that to me. I think it depends on your creative operation. How big is it? How much work is coming through? What is the nature of the work? What are the turnaround times? If you're relatively small, you've got a lot of leeway, then you're going to be trading the kind of the handiness of these low cost of entry tools with a degree of kind of corporate efficiency that you might need in a larger setup. So I don't think it's easy to say it's good or it's bad. I mean, instinctively, I would be uncomfortable with it. But on the other hand, if it gets you through the day and gets the job done, and you don't need to go out and spend large sums of money on a work front or whatever, then fine. But I think it's horses for courses. I really do.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it really depends on how big the operation is, how many players are involved. I do advocate when you get to a certain point in your creative operation, like when things go in a dam, for example, and when those things are done, it generally makes sense at that point to actually have just one source of the final assets. I think with collaboration, it's a little bit different because, of course, when you're creating a brochure using Illustrator and Creative Cloud versus video advertising with you're gonna have different production tools, and so the collaboration areas for those production tools would generally be different. And even the production tools themselves, they tend to actually have collaboration built in, and you might be logged. Multiple people might be logged into that production tool. So I think that's where there's more room for that variety and having more systems. But once you're done and once you're sort of market ready and distribution ready, then it's better to really just have one source of truth, as we would say in the dam industry, to get those assets out.
Yeah, and I'll just add my 2 cents on this too, because Karen, I think if you're trying to consolidate into one single system, I think that's almost never going to work, right? Likewise, on the other end of the spectrum, if there's no anchor stores identified, if there's no enterprise grade system, and everyone's just trying to do their own thing, that kind of defeats the purpose too. So you got to find that blend in the middle somewhere. Okay, next question for Robert and Teresa. You know, we talked about where people should focus, but I imagine in your experience, you see a lot of money wasted when it comes to this experimentation. You know, like I said, I think experimentation is good, but there's a lot of money being wasted out there. A lot of people putting effort into the wrong things, and maybe not using their money to the best of its ability, right? And so I'm just curious, from your experience, where are people wasting money when it comes to creative operations?
Teresa, please.
Sure. I think in general, and I would say this about just about any technology market, not just creative operations, is that people think buying the most expensive tool or the most feature-rich tool is the thing to do and the best thing to do, and where a simple tool will do just fine. You know, you can definitely buy a really fancy whisk, but a fork will also scramble your eggs, you know? And so that's where I see people wasting the most money. And I sometimes have to convince organizations, especially big ones that have a lot of money, to just say, you can use a simple solution here. And I have found that lean, you know, sort of leaner solutions are now more embraced even by big companies. And I think that's because they also want to feel like if they want to throw it out in 3 years and put something else in, that they won't have spent, you know, $2 million to set it up or something like that. So I think that's a big one. Well, I could come up with others, but I'll let Robert talk first, because I think that's the technology answer. So go ahead, Robert.
But I think you're right. I think systems like Workfront, I've seen they cost a lot of money. They do an awful lot. And time again, I've seen them be implemented without any vision, without any resources or thought put to how this should ultimately be. It's kind of been deployed. It's led to ill feeling. It's led to people not cooperating internally, resistance. Then they bring in the consultants, costs even more because they're trying to work back to where they were, and they're trying to get the buy-in of people who've already set their hearts against it. And I keep mentioning Workfront, but you know, this could happen with any complex system. And to my mind, the ones that actually do tend to work are the ones that, to Teresa's point, are just straightforward. And I mentioned the system we deploy, which we created in-house. And frankly, it's very simple. It wouldn't stand up against many of the systems out there, feature for feature, but you know what? It lets a requester request something, see where they are in the campaign, and retrieve those assets at the end of the process with a proofing bit in the middle. And that's for a lot of people all they need. So it doesn't have to cost a fortune. And in fact, the more expensive the system, very often, paradoxically, the more money can be wasted trying to implement it or get it right, or actually on efforts to get people to adopt it. That's a big hidden cost.
I couldn't agree more with both of you. I think what you're both getting at is is something that we see on an ongoing basis, where people are always afraid that they're going to underbuy. They're not going to buy enough technology to solve their challenges. But I see it as a flip side problem. I see there's much more risk that you overbuy, right? In almost every technology that we're looking at. The salespeople are coming to the table from the technology vendors trying to sell you as much as you can, and that all looks well, all good. But can you handle that? You know, and that's where the money's wasted. Simpler is almost always better.
And when you get buy-in, there's another place I see it a lot, is where someone sponsors something, they really dig the technology, they've looked at it for years, they've always wanted it, they get it, and quite often they buy it, and then their career moves on and they've gone. And they've left the company with a system and no vision and no visionary and no sponsor. And that I've seen quite a bit as well along the way. So it does require people to personally own it and want to drive it forward and know where it's going as well.
There was, just to piggyback on that, there was a really good study that was done by the Content Marketing Institute last year sometime, and I don't remember the percentage off the top of my head, but it was well more than half of marketers felt that they didn't even use like 3/4 of the features of the tools that they had, you know, and so in many ways they're aware that they're overbuying. They buy the fancy tool, and then it takes everybody, you know, I mean, I'm just thinking about DAM, but you could take it with any technology. It takes 18 months to 2 years even to get the basics down with these enterprise tools. And then once you're finally got that established, you're like, oh wow, even just to get there, I'm only using 25% of the capabilities of this technology. Yeah, and it's incredible because so many of these, and this is one of the ways that technology vendors will fool buyers, of course, is they'll have them sign on for all the modules, you know, from the beginning, as if they're going to use all those modules from the beginning, and they don't. So it's not even just an argument to buy something simple to start, but it's also an argument to think about how you're going to sort of progress with the tools, because you're just not going to use the whole thing all at once from the beginning. It just doesn't happen that way.
So let's change direction slightly here, but you know, we have a question from Luca who's asking, you know, for an organization that's getting started out in this space and, you know, starting to, you know, apply some technology to the creative operations area of their enterprise, you know, any advice on how to get buy-in from senior decision makers? You know, how do you convince your boss is really what he's asking here, as to, you know, that we do need something here. You know, they're probably getting by today by cobbling things together, and you know, I'm sure the work's getting done, but how do you convince them that there's a better way to do things?
Well, shall I take that first?
Go for it.
Sure.
Yeah, so there's two ways. One you can't do anymore, which is take them out for a few pints and just really kind of show them that you just know what you're doing and they don't need to worry. And by the way, can I have $100,000 to implement a new system over the next 2 years? That's one way to do it. Frankly, the most boring and pedestrian way I know of, but most practical, is ROI. It's about what's the return on this investment? What's it going to cost? So you actually have to crunch the numbers, I'm afraid. You talk to the vendors, you get estimates, you double them, and then you look at your costs of operation, you start measuring how long it's taking you to do things, you look at things like revisions and all the usual stuff, and you work out what is actually the real business reason in pounds, shillings, and pence, or dollars and cents for you to get a system like this. And that makes the argument really, really easy if you can get that far. But it does require a lot of work that you can't automate because you haven't got a system to track those numbers.
Floppy disks and now shillings. It's like amazing.
And I'm about to have my COVID vaccination, so I know I'm old.
I want to buy a floppy disk with my shillings. Can I do that?
So American.
Sorry. Just being a tease, you know, because this is just sort of the fun. We're trying to have a fun, you know, a little time.
I probably have a floppy disk in my drawer here, Teresa.
Do you
I'm
really?
sure
Wow.
you weren't around when they were popular, but
no, I'm not as young as I look. So I do have floppy disks. Actually, I found a whole bunch when I sold my house in America last year. I found a whole bunch of floppy disks in the basement. So yeah, I did have floppy disks.
You kept them for a reason, I'm sure.
To continue with the question, I think ROI is really tough to prove in this space, though, isn't it? You know, I think that the amount of time it takes to do things is sometimes it's hard for people to even tell you how long it takes them to do something, because it often isn't sort of a fixed moment in time. It's like, well, this is my job, and I'm sort of doing 500 things during the day, and I've often, of course, I'm usually doing a business case for digital asset management. So it's, well, how long does it take you to find stuff? You know, and how many people do you have to email, you know, to find what you're looking for? Do you actually ever reuse an asset, or are you always going back to the designer and saying, hello, you know, can you find, is this on your hard drive or something like that? But I admit that every time I put it in a spreadsheet and I calculate it somehow, I kind of go, you're not really going to have any ROI for a couple of years, you know, because you're going to have to spend 200K on the system. So I'm not really helping Luca.
You can be a little creative with those numbers, though, can't you?
Yeah.
I mean, the fact is, what is the cost of using the wrong logo in something that you're printing 100,000 copies of?
Yeah.
You know, what is the cost of that? What's the cost of having the wrong link on a CTA?
For sure. I think also, though, it's a really good argument with executives is what can't you do because you don't have this technology, rather than necessarily, yes, you can do a return on investment, but how is not having a technology holding you back from doing certain things? And I think when it comes to creative assets, scaling them, especially if you're a global company with lots of markets and you need to translate into lots and lots of languages, like if you don't have technology that enables the rapid variant creation and the replication of assets and the translation of assets, you're not going to be able to support global distribution. So this is an example of something like that's a more powerful ROI, is more what could you get out of that versus just, yes, time savings, efficiency is good, but there's even the bigger picture stuff I think that's relevant.
Yeah, Chris, you used the word there. You said scale, right? And Marta actually has a question around that. And she's basically bringing up the issue that sure, we could talk about, we're all trying to solve a problem that exists today, but we all know that it's not a fixed target that we're trying to attack here, right? Our companies are changing. Our people are moving up the ladder, moving out of our organization, new people coming in, new ideas coming in, the vendor marketplaces are changing. How do we position ourselves to scale for this unknown future?
Have we ever had a 12-month period where things have been more unknown in our lifetimes? I mean, really, so that's very tough to say. There's a wonderful book that was published actually right before the pandemic broke out, called Uncharted, written by a longtime friend and mentor of mine, Margaret Heffernan, and who lives here in the UK. And I thought that the book made so many brilliant points about why you can't predict the future. And part of the problem I think we have in the technology industry is that we think that if we have enough data, we're definitely going to be able to figure it out, right? And if we put it all on a BI dashboard and we kind of move it around in different ways, we're just like, we're going to be able to predict the future. We're going to know what our customers want. We're going to be able to anticipate everything. And I just don't believe that. I believe that the important thing is that we create flexible environments and we create flexible technology stacks that are open and have very good APIs, because tomorrow you're going to have to change, and we can't necessarily predict. And this is why we have microservices. This is why we have the kinds of architectures, and this is why our technology has evolved the way that it has, is because it has to be flexible, because we can't predict the future. And Lord knows, a year ago, we never would have predicted that none of us would see our clients for a year, right? But here we are. So I think the important thing is the principle of flexibility and APIs and openness, so that we can adjust, not to try to plan for a future that is uncertain.
I can't top that. I think the fact is you can't predict. You can only do what you can. You need something that helps you do what you need to do today, and do that really, really well. If you can do some obvious future proofing around that, like make sure it's got APIs and so on, and to blow my own horn, have relationships with companies like mine to give you that ability to suddenly move in another direction, or to have capacity, in a burst when you need it for something you weren't anticipating. They get those relationships in place up front as well. But above all, I think it's really important that to get the best from any technology you're putting in that is future-proof, you've got to get adoption for it internally as well, so that everyone can go with that when those changes happen. But Teresa, you're absolutely right. Yeah, I think it's folly to try and predict the future. I really do.
Yeah, and Marta, I'll just add that I'm using my shopping mall analogy just to once again. You can't build the perfect mall, but if you get your anchor stores right, I think that'll set you up for that unknown future as best you can, right? If you're managing your assets in a way that aren't tied to a particular channel like web or something like that, if you're managing them fundamentally through a life cycle, I think no matter what new channels emerge, what new challenges emerge, I think if you are managing your assets in a way, you're managing your product content in a way, and you're managing your core processes in a way, I think you'll be able to pivot for the future. But you got to get those basics right. You got to get those building blocks right. So that's the way I like to think about it. All right, I know this session is called "What Should Be in Your Technical Toolkit," and we've been doing a lot of conversation. We've been having a lot of conversation about technology and solutions in that respect. But let's talk about a little bit of the softer skills needed to be successful with any technology, right? And Karen again has another great question around system owners. right? And she mentioned, when you talk about, project management and workflow systems, oftentimes you need a project manager to kind of oversee that and help shepherd that along. When you talk about DAM, obviously there's a need for, people that understands the library side of things, the metadata side of things, the cataloging side of things. There's a lot of skill sets needed here, but when we talk about bringing in not just one technology, but maybe this blend of technology, do we need to think differently? Do we need to have product owners and then program owners, or how do we need to structure this? And any thoughts on kind of applying the management to this technology to be successful?
She asked good questions, Karen, right?
She just very, very good.
I'm a big advocate of trying to get MarTech leaders in place today. I feel like it's a struggle I'm having with a lot of companies. I mean, fortunately there's been a great growth of what's called sort of product owner or system owner. So you often now, fortunately, will have a DAM manager or someone who's in charge of creative operations, and they are maybe owning particular systems and running particular systems or managing particular systems.
This wouldn't be a full-time role necessarily, right, Teresa? This would be just part of their responsibility?
Not necessarily, but I would say that the lion's share now of my clients have a DAM manager or a global head of DAM, which was totally not the case 5 years ago. Definitely, that 10 years ago, I was like, forget it. It was like some marketing assistant who was just putting in metadata. That was it. So I find that it is, at least with digital asset management, it's very common now to have a DAM manager. Even in one small art charity that I work with, they have a DAM manager. So I think that's good, but now we are facing a moment, and this is definitely the case with connecting this end-to-end creative operations ecosystem, where you need somebody who's kind of above all that is strategizing and essentially leading what I call the connective tissue. How are we going to link these systems and bring them together? And unfortunately, when you just have a whole bunch of product owners or people whose half-time job it is to maintain a system, then there's nobody really thinking about that bigger picture. How do we better connect this ecosystem? How do we align the data so that we're going to be able to have these systems actually automate where possible and all those sorts of things? So there needs to be that higher kind of layer that frankly is.
What about going to your IT folks, Teresa, and asking them to take charge?
It's interesting because I've seen a few people who now have like marketing technology titles. They're like MarTech or head of MarTech or marketing technology, strategist, whatever. And sometimes they're very often former consultants who kind of come in and they're hired by brands to do this. But I find that again, they're tasked with something that's going to take 2 to 3 years by the time they come in and get the picture of the situation and link it all together. And that I think is it's important. It's what we need. It's what's lacking now with the governance layer to bring these things together. Robert, your thoughts?
Well, I think what you're saying is absolutely right, but can't be afforded by a lot of creative production studios. If you're 20 people, it's very unlikely you can get another salary in there just dedicated to looking after all of the MarTech technology that you've got around the place. Yeah. That doesn't mean to say it wouldn't also have an ROI in doing it. I just think it would be quite a big sell. Yeah. So I think when it comes down to that, then quite often you can be looking at systems that the SaaS systems that provide SaaS systems that provide that along with the technology itself, but just watch the price ticket. That's the only thing I'd be wary of. But having said that, a lot of these system providers do have real experts. They've seen a lot of systems, a lot of setups, a lot of shapes and forms of creative operations, and they can bring quite a lot of knowledge to configuring, setting, and tips for deploying and so on. So I think that for the smaller ones, certainly that may be the best option. But yes, you do need to be in touch with experts. Otherwise, you're not going to get, well, not even the best. You're not even really going to get much out of the system. In fact, quite the opposite. It might actually be more harm than good.
I would also say, just as one more point, kind of the executive buy-in. I mean, that's so important with all of these these tools and just making sure that the communication is coming down from above also really helps with adoption, and that makes the governance easier. You know, the sort of classic going back to management, making sure that they're aware and endorsing the situation.
Yeah, it's so easy to think about this world in silos, and like this piece of technology hits my job, but this one doesn't, and this one doesn't. But you need someone at some level to see the big picture, because this is an end-to-end process. It is bigger than just one person's job. So someone needs to be thinking about it at a program level. All right, we have 5 minutes to go, but I do have one of my favorite questions. And Kevin, I think you're a bit of a plant, and I like it. What advice would you have about going about finding the must-have tools in your toolbox? So once you identify, hey, we need a DAM, we need a workflow system, we need XYZ system, how do you find the right one for what it is you're trying to do? This is what I do for a living, so I'll throw it out to both of you, but I'll give my 2 cents. I won't be able to help myself.
Yes. Go ahead, Robert. You go first.
Ask your mates. That's the first place to go. I always think, network, use these conferences, reach out to people, find people who have similar challenges and similar problems to you, and talk to them about their experiences, because there is nothing like that kind of peer review process, even if it's informal, to get you to a short list quite quickly.
Well, I'm going to advocate, since I worked with Jared for so long, I'm going to advocate you hire a market expert.
Ask Jared.
Like Jared or myself. Simply because then you have a totally unbiased view. It is, of course, it's good to get peer input. I think peer input is extremely valuable, of course, because they will be very frank and they will tell you, this is the good experiences I've had and the not so good experiences that I've had. So that's good. But I also think, having an objective, someone who's worked in the industry for a long time and knows a lot of the tools and can give you that input is also a really good idea. There's also, of course, a lot of really good research out there written by people like Jared that you can access, but you have to be very, very skeptical of a lot of sources of information, obviously on the internet, and even things like peer reviews that are crowdsourced and things like that. A lot of those people are paid, and they're even paid by the vendors, to go there and write, certain things. So you have to be really skeptical of where you're getting your information. So I would say, hire really people who are experts, talk to your peers. And, in terms of methodology, it's so important. Jared and his partner, Tony, they have a book about selecting technology. It's great. It's a methodology that I follow as well. And it's all about, use case scenarios. It's not about long spreadsheets of requirements and, RFPs that are 25 pages or longer. It's much more about describe how I'm going to use this software, and tell me, what's the story. So I can't advocate, enough. And it's amazing to me how many organizations still don't know what use cases are. Had it happen two days ago with a client that I was, saying this is what you need to do. And I go, what's a use case? Can you send me some examples? Right. So really important to describe that rather than just, list a bunch of technical specs. Jared.
I think you said it all great, and I'm not going to belabor the point, but I think you used a key word there, Teresa. It's all about describing the way you want to work in the future, right? And whether that encompasses a single technology or the entire process, but describe without prescribing a solution, right? Describe the way you want to work without telling the vendor exactly how you want it solved. Let them see your challenges and then come to the table and give you their best pitch, right? And then you can see which pitch works better for you, because there's going to be different ways to solve the same problem. And just like we said, there's not a one size fits all solution here. That doesn't mean the vendors aren't going to come in and try to sell you a one size fits all. They will, and I can tell you from my experience, that's not the way to go. So do your due diligence, do your research, talk to your friends. Sure, describe the situation and test those vendors as to how suitable they are and how good of a fit for what it is you're trying to do. All right, we're just about out of time, so I just want to take this opportunity to thank everyone for joining us today. We had some great questions. I apologize I didn't get to all of them, but we got to a few. And Robert and Teresa, thank you as always for your insights. I really appreciate it, and I think this type of conversation is really valuable to those at any stage of the creative operations process. So thank you both so much.